I bought my first kit and brewed my first batch of beer. And since then, I've come to appreciate different styles of beer, and brewing your own beer is an excellent way to do that. Made me go to the liquor store, the grocery store, and try the different styles. And it's great to make you realize that there's more types of beer out there than just the typical Bud Light, Budweiser, Miller Lite, things like that. And then, you know, it's a lot of fun when you tell people you brewed this beer. Feel like you're creating something instead of just going and buying it at the store. It's like cooking your own food instead of going to McDonald's kind of thing. And it's so nice having good taste testers like Ricky and some of my other friends that come by and to sample some of the beer, and they ask questions. They're curious. But anything to add, Ricky?
No, I'm just ready to drink this one. It looks very delicious.
Yeah. But we can go ahead, it's cooled off right now. We can go ahead and take the wort chiller out. You want to go turn the hose off, Ricky? Yeah, set it on. Ricky's going to go turn the hose off. Take it out, put the lid back on. Okay, now we will take, like I explained to you earlier, this is the primary fermenter, and this is where the beer will undergo primary fermentation, which is where the yeast will eat most of the sugar from the malt and convert it to alcohol and CO2. During this process, get all this stuff out of there. During this process, when fermentation first starts, there will be a head of like foam called crossin that will form on top of the beer. And then after most of the fermentation is done, that crossin will fall. And then a couple days later, you can bottle, or you can put it in your secondary fermenter, which is the glass bottle I showed you earlier, and then you can bottle it later. It's very, very important to, at minimum, after the crossin falls, to wait 1 week before you bottle your beer. If you wait more than 1 week, or if you wait less than 1 week, like if you bottle it when it's still fermenting, you can have what's called bottle bombs, where your bottles will explode from the pressure that the beer builds up from the fermentation process. Because it gives off the CO2 and the pressure will build, and bottles will explode. I've never had that because I read about it and was careful. But just so you know, to be careful. That's why it's good when you're getting started to use plastic buckets, because if it pops the top off, no harm. You can just snap it back down. If you want to use a bottle like a 5.5 gallon bottle like I have here, you can use that, but you'll need to put a tube, what's called a blow-off hose, to put on that into another bottle with sanitizer. That way it just lets the pressure off, even if it fills up. They make bigger glass bottles, 6.5 gallons, that I typically would use, that you don't have to worry about that as much, but you still have to be careful and make sure that the crossin doesn't get too full. Okay, so now we have our bucket of sanitizer we mixed up here, and I'm just going to pour a little bit of the sanitizer into this bucket, and then take the lid from it, snap it down. You might get a little messy here from sanitizer coming out, but don't worry about it. Might hold your thumb over the hole on the top, just shake it up. Make sure that it gets all, in every little nook and cranny there. And take the lid off. Hand it to your brewing assistant. Pour the sanitizer back into the bucket. Okay, now right here, this is an important part. Yeast require oxygen, the air inside of the wort to be successful, to be healthy. So you will want to pour the wort as violently as possible into your bucket. They have special things like this if you want to siphon it into a glass jug that you can hook that helps siphon it. They also make, they're kind of like fish aquarium stones that are stainless steel that you could put inside of it and let the air pump do it. Or an easier way, just pour it in from as high as you can without missing. It's hard to do if you have a big batch, like if you're boiling 5 gallons, so you might have to use a pitcher and pour it in a couple at a time before you pour it. But that will help to aerate your wort, which will be beneficial to the yeast later. But it's important to cool it below 100 degrees before you dump your wort. If it's over 100 degrees, then you will get what's called oxidation, which is bad. That means that little bits of oxygen will cling to your wort from it, and then it will add a cardboard, kind of a wet cardboard taste to your beer, which you don't want. So it's very important to cool it as low as you can before you do this. And you never want to handle hot beer violently. You want to make sure you're very easy with hot beer. But once it's cooled to this point, it's about 80 degrees right now, then it's a little bit, it's not quite as big of a deal. Okay, so I'll pick it up. This is probably it's about 2.5 gallons now, so it's not quite as big of it's not that much, so I don't have to use a pitcher. And this is our sanitized bucket that I've sanitized. And you just pour it in, let it splash around, won't hurt anything. Just pour all the hops in there with it, is what I do. I left a little bit of hops behind. It does not look very good right there, but it's still good. At this point, we only have, we have right about 3 gallons of beer. We need to take that up to 5 gallons, which be right here. So we'll have to use tap water. We'll just use from the hose and fill it up to the 5-gallon mark. And then we'll put the lid on, or add the yeast, then we'll put the lid on, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's good. So now we're just adding just regular water. Sometimes in the past I've used pre-boiled water and added it because I was worried about infection, but then I've done it like this several times later and have had no problem. So that's just how we're doing it today. We'll just top it up to 5 gallons. That's how much beer we want. Okay, that's good, Rick. Okay. Now, the next step, we will sanitize our spoon. Make sure you get the whole thing covered with sanitizer. Then we'll stir it up to mix the wort that we just added with the water we just added. Okay, now we have to take a sample that we're going to use to measure the gravity, which I'll explain in a minute. This thing is really handy. I bought this in Columbia Cool Stuff. This is called a thief. I think they called it a wine thief, but I use it for beer as well. And what it does is it has a little thing at the bottom. You push it down, and then it fills up with your liquid. And then you can do a gravity, use your hydrometer to measure the gravity, which I'll explain in a minute. But you got to make sure this is sanitized as well. Remember, at this point, everything that comes into contact needs to be sanitized. To take a sample, you just drop it down, wait for it to fill up. Okay. And then you take, this is the hydrometer. It's just a little glass piece you might have used in science class in high school. This is a way to measure the sugar, essentially, the weight. Because when the yeast eat the sugar, the alcohol that it leaves behind actually weighs less than the sugar. So it's a way there's a formula you can figure the amount of sugar, or the weight that you start with versus the weight you end with, the gravity you end with, and it tells you how much alcohol is left in it. So you don't have to do this, it's an optional step, but it will tell you your alcohol percentage when you're done. And so it's real easy, you just drop it in there, and they'll tell you where it floats. My gravity is about 1.548, which is exactly where I wanted. So that will give me a beer right up a little more than 5%. Kind of probably, depending on where it ferments down to,